What's up, guys? Welcome into the Fireside Bears YouTube channel. You can follow us on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at Fireside Bears. My name is Usayd Kosho alongside my host, Max Smith. You can follow us on Twitter at Usayd Kosho and at Max Smith ESM. Before we get into all the action, we have to let you guys know if you're a diehard Bears fan, look, you need to be tuning into everything Fireside Bears related from the articles, YouTube videos, and podcasts that we offer. Occasionally, we'll post a couple things here and there on TikTok. Not of us dancing though, like some of you guys have wondered. But how you doing today, Max?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. Maybe we should do some dances. But yeah, definitely make sure you're subscribed. We're very, very, very happy with over 500. So thank you guys very much. Very excited to keep pumping out some good content here. Um, Today we're going to be talking about draft class, specifically in regards to the offensive line. This is something that gets us excited because we're a fan of the trenches. GM Ryan Poles has stated that he's going to kind of focus on the trenches. It's been an issue for the Bears for a couple of years now. Um, when we look at rebuilding the offensive line, we're probably going to look at doing that through the draft, primarily because of our lack of cap space or our situation in the free agency, the amount of talent at other positions that we desperately need. But also because if we're looking at a complete culture shift, the best way to do that is to bring in fresh faces and fresh talent. So today we're going to break down some of the guys that we think the Chicago Bears should target in the 2022 offensive line draft class.
Yeah, and I want to, before we get into the action, right, talk just about like a culture shift for a second, because and bringing in new faces too, because one of the big things with the Bears and fans, you really have to understand this, is that let's talk just for 2 seconds about the free agency class. Everybody wants Ryan Jensen and everybody wants Brian Allen, and there's guys like Austin Corbett out there that would make pretty intriguing options. But I also think when you look at the way that the market's going for these offensive linemen, especially in the interior, the tackles have been one of the most expensive positions in football. And I think the Bears would be foolish to even invest in the tackle position, knowing that Larry Borom and Tevin Jenkins have the potential to be really solid. But the reason I bring this up is because in Luke Getsy's offense, you need to have a really strong interior. That means you better have really good left and right guards, as well as a really good center. Now, the thing is the Bears can go out and find someone in free agency, but Ryan Poles has also shown and told us, hey, I'm not going to be someone that's going to reel in the big fish. And when we talk about some of the best offensive lines in the NFL, the big thing to consider is that all these lines, for the most part, were built through the draft. I understand everyone's going to say, well, why don't you look at Ryan Poles and the Kansas City Chiefs during the 2021 offseason? Didn't they go ahead and basically throw money at Joe Thuney, give up money, I'm sorry, draft picks for Orlando Brown Jr.? Yeah, they did. But that was a different situation, and that was an kind of an exception to the rule, specifically because when we look at Thuney and Orlando Brown Jr., it's very rare that two players of those caliber are ever available. The rest of the guys, like a Creed Humphrey, like a Trey Smith, and then for nearly 10 to 11 years before that, the Chiefs' primary focus when it came to building up the offensive line, the primary pipeline was the NFL draft. And so, kind of when we get into 2022 here, we realize Ryan Poles is going to do much of the same. And the Bears don't have a first or a fourth round pick. But when you look at this draft class, the offensive line position favors the Bears because the second round is where you are going to get, I think, premium value for a player that probably should be a first round pick in any other draft class, but is going to slip as a result of, the draft being so deep at the O line position. And then also, you're going to get a really good starter on a cheap contract for 4 seasons.
Yeah, 100%. I think that when we're looking at this year's draft, we have to notice that there's really not a whole lot of, all-star home run hitter names that we're anticipating to be the next big X factors in the NFL, right? This draft is wide, right? Or sorry, deep as much as it is wide. So there's a lot of depth here that gets us excited because we're gonna want to watch days 3 and 4 here just because of the amount of talent that is going to go in some of these later rounds, specifically like you just said at the offensive line position, because there's a ton of talent here this year. This might be one of the most stacked line drafts that we've seen in recent memory. And there are some real game changers for teams that are just waiting to be brought on and into their programs. The Bears' needs right now are particularly at the guard and the center position for long-term solutions. Cody Whitehair is kind of ticking up there in age. Obviously, guards can last a lot longer than running backs or wide receivers can, but that's still a concern. James Daniels, of course, potential free agent this year. Depends on whether or not the Bears decide to bring him back. And then, of course, Sam Mustipher is a big question mark at the center position. So primarily, we look at the real question mark at this line being at the center. But it's hard to imagine that the Bears are going to look at bringing on new position or new talent at the tackle position, specifically since the Bears used 2 draft picks last year to bring in Larry Parham and Tevin Jenkins. Borum had a relatively serviceable season. He wasn't fantastic, but he really wasn't all that bad. And of course, Tevin Jenkins didn't get to play as much because of that back injury. But looking at what the Bears are specifically going to do, at least in regards to the offensive line position, we're looking at primarily bringing in guards / centers or talent that could do both. So, Usayd, what's your top couple of prospects there at that position?
Yeah,
Those
well,
two.
there's, first things first, let me just say this. When I'm building my Bears big board this year, I'm not going to necessarily leave any players off. That's for my NFL board. But to be realistic here, because the Bears don't have a first round pick this year, like I mentioned a moment or two ago, there's going to be a couple players that are left off. So as much as I would love a guy like a Tyler Linderbaum from Iowa, unfortunately, unless he tests terrible at the combine and just blows the workouts at the combine and the pro days, he's going to be gone in the first round. Okay. But I would look at my number one guy being Boston College offensive lineman Zion Johnson. If you led my latest Bears mock draft on Fireside Bears, you would know that Zion Johnson was indeed my first pick. When you look at Zion Johnson, I know that some people look at him and say, well, he's somebody that could possibly play offensive tackle. I see him being more of a guard. I think he can play left guard or right guard. Your left guards are responsible for like pass blocking. Your right guards are more so responsible for running the football. That's typically just how it goes and assisting in the run game. But I think Zion Johnson's an intriguing case because he's about 6'3", 215, a really big, strong, powerful player. A guy who moves, I think, really well for someone of his size as well, considering the position he plays. And then I also see him being a really smart and instinctive player. So this is someone that the Bears are going to be getting that is really going to come in from day one. I think he's a plug and play starter, and he's got the potential to really develop into a leader. So Zion Johnson's certainly a name to keep an eye on. And I should mention, Ryan Poles, a lot of times with GMs is they like to go back to their alma maters because they have connections. So I would not be surprised to see Ryan Poles make the first official Bears draft pick of his time as Bears GM be a Boston College player too. You could certainly see it happening. And I understand Boston College is not the cream of the crop in college football, nor is it the cream of the crop in the ACC. But one thing that I think we can certainly agree on is that Boston College has sent some really solid talent to the NFL over the last basically decade or so. I mean, Matt Ryan's one of the biggest names that comes to my mind. AJ Dillon's certainly another one. Okay. And now you could add Zion Johnson into that portal too. And, because we are talking about guards, right, and offensive linemen, I think that another Boston College guy to keep an eye on, I believe his name is Alec Lindstorm, another day 3 or 4 pick another round 3 or 4 pick who I know for a fact was a 3-year starter and then had numerous accolades too. So look to Boston College. Okay. I think Lindstorm's another one that, needs to bulk up a bit more because he's only 298 pounds, but certainly could be a mid-round steal.
Yeah, I think it's Lindstrom, but it's okay. Like there's Linderbaum and Lindstrom is the one that I used to get mixed up all the time. But it is what it is. But you're right, 100%. The meat is there. Lindstrom is I saw his stock fall just a little bit, just because of some of the outshining that Zion Johnson was able to do, specifically at the Senior Bowl. You hit it right on the head. There is Johnson is a little undersized to play tackle in the NFL, but he has the perfect frame, the perfect build, and all of the attributes to be a killer guard. Specifically, what makes Alec Lindstrom interesting is his ability to anchor at the center position. That's what he did at college, correct? It's what he did at BC. completely right. Ryan Poles has to look no further than his alma mater to find two maulers. There's a little bit of concern regarding Alec Lindstrom's strength, or rather so his weight. Looking at that, Sam Mustipher had all of the attributes that you wanted out of center except for the strength factor. He had every motivation factor. He was smart. He was able to call out some of the defenses, did his job. But the strength just wasn't there. So there's a bit of a concern there for Lindstrom as well. Johnson isn't a natural center. He took some snaps at the Senior Bowl to show off that he can actually put the ball in between his legs and give it to the quarterback. Didn't look too great, didn't look too natural. So it's clear that that's not really where he should be in the NFL, although give it a summer, he might be able to get there. But you're completely right there. There's two great guys at BC. There's a guy over at Memphis that I think we should keep an eye on as well, and that's Dylan Parham. This guy is a little under the radar, but the Chicago Bears have proven over the past couple of years that there's a little conference in the southeast of the United States of America that they like to look at in a mid-round draft talent. Colleges like Tulane, colleges like Memphis. And this guy in particular, he's 6'2", he's 313. He's a guard / center. Again, you can kind of move him around. I'm sure he wouldn't have a difficult time. He's more of a true guard. You probably wouldn't have a difficult time putting him at the center position. He's in his fourth year. He's incredibly fast. He's strong. He has ridiculous athletic attributes. He's a guy that's kind of flown a little bit under some of the major radar, but he's a name definitely to watch because, again, what we're looking at right now is they're going to be sitting around and watching tape of these guys, specifically at the O-line, and they're going to look for the guys who make the mean plays. They're going to look for the guys who make the nasty plays. They're going to look for the guys who are going to go up until the whistle, right? And Parham is one of those guys that I think we really need to take a look at and go, okay, let's get us an absolute nasty mauler and let's put him in the middle of this offensive line and let's just let him go out there and get it.
So Dylan Parham's a name I think that has really flown under the radar in this draft class because we talk so much about who some of these prospects are. And Memphis, I think, over the last couple of years has certainly sent good players to the NFL. Antonio Gibson's one name that comes to mind. But what I really think when I look at Dylan Parham is that he's about 6'3", 6'4". I know a couple draft websites have him listed at 285 to 290 pounds. So that's certainly going to be a concern for him in terms of getting to the NFL is can he add more weight to his frame? So that really right now is a big reason that a lot of players are kind of looking at him, or I'm sorry, a lot of teams are really looking at him and saying, okay, you know what? Unfortunately, with Parham, what it is that he doesn't have the ideal weight needed to really play interior offensive line at a high level. Now, one of the players that I think we need to keep an eye on staying here in the SEC is Jamari Salyer from Georgia. The Bears love their Georgia players, and Georgia's been a very good provider of offensive linemen over the last couple seasons. I mean, I know Ben Cleveland's a name that the Baltimore Ravens drafted. Andrew Thomas, certainly one of their higher draft picks over the last couple of years from that program. People are split on Andrew Thomas, but I think he's going to be really solid. He'll be a solid left tackle. Look at Jamari Salyer from Georgia. When I look at Salyer, one of the things that really sticks out to me is he's okay, whatever. 6'3", 6'4", about 330 pounds. He is your typical guard that fits into your power run scheme, right? He's got really good balance, great agility. When it comes to pass blocking, I think he's phenomenal in that area. One of the biggest things about him, he's incredibly tough. Okay. So he's never going to back down from a challenge. And then he's also just able to move with ease. Another thing about Salyer is that he's got really good hand technique, really good hand placement. And also, I think when we look at him, he's a really smart and instinctive player. And also somebody that you could possibly experiment with playing on the outside. But I think at the NFL level, his best fit is suited at either left or right guard.
Yeah, his size is massive, and I think that's really what he plays to his advantage is just how strong, he's like a tree out there. He's not the most athletic, and that's not really what you're going to get out of him, so don't expect him to, get out there on a trap or be really quick down the field on any of those leads. But no, the dude's an absolute mauler. There's been concerns, again, regarding, I guess, how quick, how well conditioned some of the stamina of some of the offensive linemen that have come out of Georgia over the past couple of years. Because I mean, these guys are huge, right? Um, so there's some concerns there about Georgia linemen. But outside of that, he Sailor's really proved one that he deserves to be some of those big name talents that have come out of Georgia over the past couple of years at the offensive line. He stepped into some of the roles incredibly well with some of that talent leaving. And there's a reason why we're talking about him going in the third or second or fourth round. Is because he's just an incredible beast of a blocker, right? And again, like we just said, that's kind of what we're going to look at, and that's what the Bears are going to look at, or how tough or big some of these guys. And it's hard to find a bigger guy than Taylor. Staying over in the SEC, there's a little guy at LSU named Ed Ingram that I think is definitely something to look at the guard position as well. His probably the exact opposite of Sailor in the fact that this guy has the athletic intangibles that kind of make him a little bit of a freak there on the offensive line. His feet are so ridiculously good that you would have little to no issues bringing this guy in. He's strong at the point of attack, right off the ball. Boom, he's going to hit you in the chest. His primary function, which makes him really good, is in pass pro, which is something the Bears have lacked and have desperately needed. He's around 6'3", 315, solid frame, incredibly quick on his feet. I wouldn't be surprised to see him put a really impressive 40 time for his class as well. I really like Ed Ingram. If there's a name that you really want to look at in the guard position outside of Zion Johnson, if Zion Johnson is gone, next man up is most definitely going to be Ed Ingram at LSU, just because he provides what this line hasn't been able to do over the past couple of years.
Yeah, Ed Ingram certainly a really intriguing name because I also like some of the talent that has come out of LSU over the last couple seasons, but there's a prospect at Kentucky that I think is worth keeping an eye on. Darian Kinnard. I'm sorry, I know I butcher a lot of these names, but I also suck with some of these names because I just, yeah. But anyway, the point is, I like Kinnard because let's talk about his frame first. He's everything you would want in an offensive lineman. He's about 6'5", 345 pounds. Listen, typically when we get a guy that big, there are concerns about how well is he able to move, how is he going to operate, how is his ability to place his hands and have effective hand placement. Things of that nature come up. But what I like about Kinnard is that he's really tenacious, number one. He has been a longtime starter for Kentucky. Now, I do think that when you look at him, there is some work to be done in terms of refining his fundamentals. But we also have to keep something in mind is that no prospect is perfect. And certainly Kinnard is a name that I look at and I say, you know what, there's a lot of really good potential there. And so he's going to be worth taking a chance on. But what really opens my eyes about Kennard, I should say, is that his ability to anchor and just the natural power that he possesses. You know what? I think that power rushers like a Khalil Mack are going to have a really hard time getting around him. Okay. And then also for a guy that is as big and as heavy as he is, guess what? He's, I think, able to just move really effectively. And so when we kind of look at this draft class in general, there's a couple things that stick out, right? Is that the ability of these guys to move and move effectively and have really good footwork, including just the size and power that they possess, I think it really plays into what the Bears are trying to do here in terms of rebuild the offensive line. And I'm not going to say that this is going to happen, but I think it's worth throwing out there. I think the Bears can overhaul their offensive line in 2022 to be able to really go ahead and set the stage for years to come.
Yeah, Kentucky has a bunch of guys that I think are worthy of looking at with their big blue wall that they created this year. Kentucky really turned around their program over the past few years, and that was kind of anchored off the play at the running back and offensive line position. Kinnard as well as Luke Fortner, that's another name that I think is going to go pretty early in day two. Again, Guy is just a solid center, solid good guard. Kinnard is a solid tackle. If the Bears are looking at adding on bigger talent, bigger guys like a 6'5" monster to put on the line, because again, like you said, he blocks angry, and that's kind of what we're looking at and what we want. That's definitely a talent to look at. You can't really go wrong with most of the guys coming out of the SEC this year at the offensive line position. There's really been kind of an emphasis on the trenches over the past couple of years and an arms race on how well we can build those trenches, and that's starting to trickle into the NFL. And I think that that's something that's very noticeable. Is there's a ton of talented offensive line positions out of a bunch of programs, like Boston College, like a Kentucky, like in Alabama, or as well, Alabama's maybe was more so last year, but now like a Georgia or like a LSU. So I would not be surprised, and you shouldn't either, if we see a guard or a center or a tackle drafted within 2 or 3 picks from one another, just because of from the same school, just because of how much talent are coming out of the same programs this year to help out teams in the NFL, such as the Bears.
Yeah, and I think for Chicago it's important, right? Because, and I said this in my mock draft too, but I would like to see the Bears having just 5 draft picks. I would not be opposed to seeing them go ahead and make offensive line their first pick and then make offensive line one of their last picks too. I would not even be opposed to them drafting offensive linemen in back-to-back rounds, specifically because I think one thing that the Chiefs showed us, and Ryan Poles comes from that Chiefs tree, is that you can never have too many quality offensive linemen. And so I think that when we go into this draft class, there's 2 things we have to keep in mind. Number one is that your needs will dictate how you draft. Because in the past, the Bears have simply gone best player available. And that number two, offensive line is kind of what the theme of this offseason is going to be, and certainly the theme of this draft class.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we also look at where talent has been kind of identified within the Chiefs organization as well. Just a quick browsing over on a pro football reference shows a good amount of talent out of the SEC. The Bears have kind of focused, haven't really had a particular conference that they've really identified, maybe outside of what is it, CUSA? I don't even know if that's still what it's called anymore. But I mean, like, let's look at some of their past draft classes since Ryan Poles has been there. In 2020, of course, we have about 3 SEC teams, 1 Big Ten. In 2021, we have one SEC team and a bunch of ACC teams. Sorry, 2 SEC teams, all SEC, ACC draft. So the Chiefs were primarily looking at the southeastern half of the United States of America for most of their college talent. I wouldn't anticipate that to change. I don't think the Bears are really going to focus on a ton of Big Ten players. Now, I think that, again, Ryan Poles likes his ACC programs. Boston College, of course, is one of those programs. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a bunch of names out of, again, the SEC and ACC this year. So if we're really want to hyper focus on where some of the talent's going to come from, it's going to come from the conferences that have really overplayed or overdone expectations. And of course, that in the past couple of years have really been the SEC and some programs that are coming out of the ACC.
Yeah, look, Ryan Poles is a guy that has connections around the ACC specifically. That's because where he played, and he certainly also got connections around the NFL, as do all other GMs. So I think it's certainly going to be interesting in terms of what the themes that we're going to go ahead and see as to who the Bears are looking at. Because for all we know, there's connections that I have that are out there that are basically gonna start telling me, hey, these are the draft prospects the Bears are talking to. And when you kind of see that begin to happen, you kind of get an idea and a feel for, okay, this is what's really going on. And I know people are going to be like, well, every single reported prospect is someone the Bears haven't been interested in. Well, guess what? I hate to break it to you. There are some of us that actually know which prospects the Bears are interested in because yeah, the Bears were very secretive under Ryan Pace. I think there's going to be a bit more transparency under Ryan Poles. How much, I don't know, but there's still going to be a bit more. But anyways, guys, that's going to do it from us. Make sure you're following myself and Max on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at FireSideBears, as well as at Usayd Kolsha and at Max Smith ESM. Make sure you've liked, commented, and subscribed, guys. Keep an eye on our weekly show. We record Tuesday nights, drop episodes Wednesday morning. We do YouTube twice a week, and then articles are split throughout the week. But good morning, good evening, and good night wherever you may be. Bear down, guys. We will be back in a couple days here, so stay safe.